Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Talk Soccer Me podcast, an American soccer podcast for the American soccer fan. The show is hosted by yours truly, Jack Alt. Today's episode is coming to you on Tuesday, February 17th. This is the 13th episode so far this season of the Talk Soccer Me podcast. And we're back to somewhat of a normal weekend. We had 10 Premier League matches. We had some great matches out of Germany, Spain, and Italy, all with title implications. We're going to bring up all those. We're not going to get anything with the Champions League. We talked about the Champions League in the last episode. We're not going to get it out in time for a preview because you'll be hearing this episode on Tuesday, and by that point, there will be Champions League matches on Tuesday and Wednesday. Champions League recap for the second round, or the second tie of the first round, will come out on Saturday. And yeah, today's everything about the previous weekend. But before we get into all that action, we just want to go over the social medias. Make sure to follow Talk Soccer Me on all social medias, all streaming services. On Twitter and TikTok, it's at Talk Soccer to Me. On Instagram, it's the at Talk Soccer to Me podcast. The podcast is listed on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. The podcast is currently up and running on YouTube, and we do have a couple videos being released on YouTube Shorts. Follows and positive ratings go a long way for the podcast. So thank you all who listen, follow, subscribe, like, comments, reposts. Everything on social media goes an incredible way for the podcast, and I just appreciate everyone who's listening now and is interacting with us on social media. But we got a lot to talk about. I'm very excited. It's going to be a very great episode. It was a good weekend of the Premier League. There were some big results out of Spain. There was a very much a match with title implications out of Germany. And as always, Italy was as entertaining as ever. But we're going to start with the 10 Premier League matches. We're going to go 10 Premier League matches from the first one to the 10th one. And the first one was Brighton hosting Chelsea. Brighton and Chelsea had recently just played each other. They had a FA Cup match at Brighton. Brighton won the match 2-1, so that was something to consider going into this to see how that result would compare to this one, and it kind of stayed quite similar. Brighton got started early. A nice ball over the top to Mitoma. He had an absolutely stunning first touch on the long ball over the top. I believe it came from Brighton's goalkeeper, Verbruggen. It was great. His touch, his run, his cut. I mean, it was one of those goals where you can't even get mad at the Chelsea defenders. I don't know what better they could have done. It was just a great solo effort by Mitoma. I mean, absolute class goal. And then a couple minutes later in the 38th minute, it was an ugly but deserved goal from Brighton. Chelsea struggled to play it out of the back. Brighton pressed well. Ball bounces around the box. It's 2-0. A goal from Yakuba Minte. And then 63rd minute, again, Chelsea can't play it out of the back. Minte scores for Brighton. And that's your final result. Brighton 3, Chelsea 0. One thing to take away from this Brighton-Chelsea game is how misleading statistics can be. Specifically one statistic out of this game, and that was possession. Chelsea held 69.5, nearly 70% of the possession. And in normal metrics, you'd think, okay, like Chelsea did great. That was decent. Control possession, control the game. Shouldn't give up too many opportunities. And that was just not the case. It was a misleading statistic. Chelsea were not dominant in this game whatsoever. They struggled to play it out of the back at times, which cost them goals. Brighton felt like they ran harder. They just kind of attacked them. Dominated them in every statistic outside of possession. More shots, more attempts. Got after the ball great. And deserved this win. And now after this result, Chelsea have fallen to 6th. Brighton are at 10th. Chelsea aren't looking great right now. In their last 10 Premier League matches, they've won 3, they've drawn 3, they've lost 4. This is not really looking like the Chelsea side of earlier in the season. This is kind of looking more like the Chelsea team from last year, where they were a little clueless and they didn't really know what was going on. Now, that team did get better over the course of the season under Pochettino, but right now, Maresca's team looks a little clueless, and I'm a little worried about Chelsea. Brighton are sitting middle of the pack, 9 wins, 10 draws, 6 losses, a 0 goal differential. They're a middle of the pack team, but they can be quite fun to watch at times. Definitely not boring. So Brighton-Chelsea was the Friday matchup in the Premier League this weekend. So we're going to move on to Saturday morning. The first game Saturday morning was Leicester City hosting Arsenal. I was a little worried about Arsenal going into this game. They've had some significant injuries to their attack. They were definitely starting a second string across the board up front. There were rumors of guys like Calafiori and Mikel Merino going up front. Leicester, obviously not a great team this year, but with the lack of attacking options and being away from home, I was a little worried about Arsenal. And this first half was kind of stiff. Arsenal they had possession, they had chances, but nothing really felt goal threatening. And you could say the same for Leicester City. At no point did I think Leicester City was going to break through. But then as the game rolled on, and I want to say about like maybe somewhere around the 70th minute, there was a chance for Jordan Ayew, the left winger for Leicester City, put it across the face of Arsenal's goal, and Miles Lewis-Skelly made an incredible deflection that prevented a goal. Mikel Merino gets brought on as the center forward, kind of to play the similar Kai Havertz role, and he delivered. Scored a goal in the 81st minute to make it 1-0 from a pass from Ethan Nwaneri, and then Leandro Trossard later assisted him 6 minutes later in the 87th minute, puts the game away. 2-0 Arsenal win. Big win for the Arsenal. For a majority of the game, I thought Arsenal-Leicester City was going to finish 0-0. It looked like it was going to be a 0-0 draw. Arsenal's attack was incredibly stale. Raheem Sterling was just not working on the left wing. Leandro Trossard was not working in the middle. Odegaard and Nwaneri were trying their best on the right side of the attack. But again, Arsenal were just looking stale, incompetent, like they weren't going to produce anything. And then the substitution of Merino comes in. And it worked. It kind of felt very reminiscent of Havertz, a guy who's more of a attacking-minded midfielder, being that big man up front who can win headers, who can be a force in the box. I was frankly impressed with Arsenal. I was impressed that they got this victory. It showed grit. It showed maybe they are willing to push for a title fight. Injuries happen to everyone. Great teams have to be scrappy with it, and they showed that against Leicester. It got a little nervy at times. There were one or two Leicester chances, but it never felt truly threatening. And with that win, Arsenal move up to second. Leicester stay in 19th in that poor position they've been in for most of the season. Arsenal do have Martinelli and Saka coming back later, I think in March, mid-March to late March, both of them coming off hamstring injuries. It's going to be tough, though, because Arsenal still have Champions League ties on top of their 13 remaining games in the Premier League. So there's still a lot of soccer to be played for Arsenal. Leicester, however, just continue to struggle. Next up on the Saturday slate, we're going to head to the reigning champions, Manchester City, as they hosted Newcastle. Manchester City coming off that 3-2 loss at home to Real Madrid on the weekend. And they started out strong. Ederson sent a ball over the top to Omar Marmoush, their new signing from Eintracht Frankfurt, the Egyptian. It was a pretty poor decision by Kieran Trippier for Newcastle, the right back, to make a play on the ball. Trippier is an experienced player. He's won a title at Atletico Madrid. He's done well with England. I thought it was pretty stupid for him to go up and try to get ahead on that ball. It was a decent pass from Ederson, and boom, it's 1-0. Man City's up 20 minutes in. 5 minutes later, not even. Marmoush was on it with a nice cut in, and then he was right place, right time. 11 minutes after that, after a decent run and pass by Savinho, and within 33 minutes, Omar Marmoush has a Premier League hat-trick, his first Premier League hat-trick, and only his, maybe fourth or fifth appearance, and Manchester City are up 3-0. Kind of saw the game out from that point. Newcastle really knew, I think everyone knew that there was not much to play for at that point. It was over. They really weren't going to come back at Manchester City down 3 goals. And Man City actually piled it on further. James McAtee got a ball off the corner in the 84th minute, and the young youth player made it 4-0 Manchester City, and that was our final score. Coming into this game, I really wondered how Manchester City would bounce back after that devastating loss against Real Madrid. Newcastle are a good team, but Manchester City had the benefit of being home. And I thought, you know what, they might be a little fired up. They might be a little pissed off, and they looked like it. They came out strong. Marmoush looked red hot. Maybe a red hot Marmoush can be the answer in the Santiago Bernabeu next week. And this was a good result for Man City. They really needed this. I don't know if I want to call it a win that's going to turn the tide, turn their fortune, because not too long ago, they had a really good win against Nottingham Forest when Nottingham Forest was playing really well. And I thought, okay, maybe Manchester City's, righted the ship and they're going to do everything better. And it hasn't been the case. They've still been dealing with the same inconsistencies, difficulties, lapses of judgment. And Newcastle, they really never had an opportunity today. Newcastle have kind of always been their own worst enemy this season. They've been incredibly inconsistent. When they're on, they can beat anyone. But it feels like some games are just beating themselves, and they never really put up a fight today. It was going to be over from the start. Manchester City, they got a win. They moved up to 4th. Newcastle sitting 7th. And this is crazy because, again, they're sitting 4th. Manchester City is going to have their worst season in years. And they'll still, more than likely, finish in the Champions League spots, with England probably getting 5 this year. Now we're going to head down to London for another Saturday matchup. Fulham hosted Nottingham Forest, and Fulham came out of this game playing well. They came out much stronger from Nottingham Forest. They controlled possession early. They were sending cross in after cross after cross. And then finally, in the 15th minute, Emile Smith-Rowe gets his head on a Adama Traore cross and makes it. And after that, Fulham had more chances to score. They easily could have got a second goal in the first 30 minutes. But then the man on fire came through. A long ball up front to the New Zealander, Chris Wood. He finds it, dribbles a little bit, and puts it away for Nottingham Forest. Game goes into halftime at 1-1. But then Calvin Bassey gets a goal from a corner, being in the right place at the right time in the back post in the 62nd minute. And Fulham win 2-1. That was your final score at the Craven Cottage on Saturday. Losing to Fulham like that is the type of loss that will prevent a team like Nottingham Forest from finishing in the top four. I don't want to get fully concerned about their Champions League aspirations because they did recently draw Liverpool and they scored 7 on Brighton, which are great results. But this game is not the type that's going to have them finishing in the top four. And now they've got 7th place Newcastle on Sunday, and that's going to be a huge match if they want to stay in the Champions League spots. And I mentioned earlier in the show that I think England will probably get 5 spots this year and 5th will be good enough. But that can't be the mentality that new Nottingham Forest take into the Newcastle game. These are the matches that separate teams that finish in Champions League spots versus teams that don't. It's one thing to be an upper half team where you get points here and there and you do really well. But if Nottingham Forest want to finish in the Champions League, they have to go to a team like Fulham, who's sitting 8th. You know, they're a good squad. They've got plenty of talent, but they have to win that. That's a Champions League qualifying match right there. And Nottingham Forest just didn't bring the energy and have the quality to win that. We're then going to head to Aston Villa, a team that's currently in the Champions League, as they hosted Ipswich Town, recent team that's been promoted from the Championship. And this game did not get started with much action. There was an early Ollie Watkins chance, but it didn't really amount to nothing. Axel Tuanzebe, actually, in the 40th minute, got his second yellow card, put Ipswich Town in a pretty bad spot going into halftime. But then you wouldn't know it. It was a pretty good cross for Ipswich Town by Amari Hutchinson. Then a finish by Delap, and they take a lead. A 10-man Ipswich Town took a lead at Aston Villa in the 56th minute. It's about as good as it's going to get. But then about 13 minutes later, Marcus Rashford, who's on loan from Manchester United, who was able to sub into the game, it takes a free kick, hits off the post, and the great striker Ollie Watkins is right there to put it away. And that was it. That was all the scoring on Saturday. Final score, Aston Villa 1, Ipswich Town 1. It was just one of those days for Aston Villa. You're home, the team you're playing goes down a man, and yet somehow you go down a goal. You've got chance after chance after chance, but you can't really create anything. You get a little lucky off a free kick to give you the thought that you might come back in this game, and it doesn't work out. I mean, this is a great result for Ipswich Town. You're taking it. Anytime you're a relegation battle team, you'll take any points away from home. But Aston Villa, who are currently sitting around 9th place, they're going to be very disappointed with that. Ipswich Town, they're 18th. They're going to be happy with it. That's a good result for a team like Ipswich Town. I think Aston Villa at this point, Champions League qualification through the league is going to be tough. Maybe just focus on the Champions League itself. Probably better off. Maybe that's why you brought in guys like Rashford and Asensio. Next match we're going to discuss was Southampton hosting AFC Bournemouth. Things got great for Bournemouth right off the bat. And when I say Bournemouth, I specifically mean Ryan Christie. 14 minutes in, wonderful cross by Ryan Christie. Ouattara puts it away with the slightest touch of his head, and boom, Bournemouth just like that are at 1-0. And less than 2 minutes later, Christie cuts in, has a nice shot outside the box, and boom, within 17 minutes of the game, he's got 1 goal and 1 assist. Bournemouth are up 2-0. Solomana makes it interesting for Southampton, though, with a nice shot in the 72nd minute, made it 2-1, and Southampton from that point on were really pressing against Bournemouth. However, Tavernier finishes the game kind of against the run of play and wins it for Bournemouth. Final score, Bournemouth 3, Southampton 1. This 3-1 victory is just a continuation of the great season that Bournemouth's having. I mean, after this result against Southampton, they've won 4 of their last 5 Premier League games. The only loss is at Liverpool and Anfield, which is not bad considering how well Liverpool have been playing this year. Next week, they host a rather poor Wolves side, and it feels like the sky's the limit for Bournemouth. They're currently sitting 5th. Again, this is the 3rd time I've said this episode, but I think the English Premier League is going to get 5 Champions League spots. and they look great. I just hope for their sake, if they do qualify for Europe next year, they can keep the core of this team together because they're good. They're fun. They're fun to watch. Great team. Good for them. Southampton, however, are not fun to watch. They're fun to play. Their historically bad season continues. They're sitting 20th. They have 9 points after 25 games. That puts them on pace for 14 points in the entire season. They're sitting 20th, and they'll most likely finish 20th. And last year's playoff champions are probably going to get sent right back down where they came from. And we're getting through these Premier League games pretty fast, pretty quick. I don't think it's going to be the longest episode this week. For better or worse, it's more of just a personal observation. We're going to move on to the next game, though. We're going to keep it rolling. Let's get the people what they want to hear. West Ham hosting Brentford at the London Olympic Stadium, and things started out kind of weird early. Brentford got a ugly goal. Thought some decent saves by Areola, but Kevin Shada was able to get the ball over the net. Brentford took a 1-0 lead 4 minutes in, and that was enough to see out the game. There were chances throughout the game for both teams. I mean, they put a combined 8 shots on goal, 27 shots total. There was 11 corner kicks. West Ham did push forward at times, but it wasn't enough. That was the final result. West Ham 0, Brentford 1. Not every Premier League game you're going to walk away from with some hot take, with some startling revelation. And the only thing I'm really pulling from this West Ham-Brentford game is West Ham are probably the worst team in the Premier League that aren't in threat of relegation. They currently sit 16th. They're 10 points ahead of Ipswich Town, who are sitting in 18th, the top relegation spot. I don't think West Ham are under any threat to be relegated. I think they've got enough talent, and they'll pull a result here or there. But of the teams that are pretty much safe, the 16 teams that are pretty much safe for the Premier League next year, West Ham are the worst. They don't look good. They look incredibly uninspiring, and they've got to figure something out before next year. Because coming off that Conference League win a couple years ago, I thought they could kind of elevate, not break into the top 6, but be where teams like Aston Villa and Newcastle are. Because that's, in my opinion, West Ham's class of team. West Ham should be more like a Newcastle Aston Villa and less like Wolves. Brentford are 11th. They usually attack pretty well, but they're not really a remarkable team either. They're going to finish somewhere between 9th and 13th and survive for another year in the Premier League. Also, step away from the soccer for a second. I do want to apologize if there's any audio issues regarding this podcast. For some reason, the mic is having a little bit of a sound issue. I think it's coming out a little quieter than I would have liked to anticipate. I do think I have it figured out now, but I think there was a solid stretch between the 5 and 15 minute mark where my voice got a little quiet at times. So if it's hard to hear, I do sincerely apologize. I believe I got everything figured out now. But hopefully no more technical issues going further in this podcast episode. We got the team working hard on it. But yeah, let's get back to the soccer. We're going to talk Crystal Palace hosting Everton. And 42 minutes into the game, Crystal Palace have a terrible throw-in. Threw it right to Everton guy. I don't know what they were doing there. Leads to a counter. Alcaraz gets the ball, finds Beto outside the box, puts it away for a nice finish in a one-on-one, and Everton are up 1-0 going into halftime. However, Everton can't clear from a corner, and Jean-Philippe Mateta scores again. What's been a wonderful season for him. Makes the game 1-1 in the 47th minute. And then Alcaraz, who we mentioned earlier, had a great game. He puts away kind of a ping-pong bouncing ball for Everton, and Everton take the lead with 10 minutes left in regular time. And a pretty open, fun game finishes 2-1 for Everton as they defeat Crystal Palace. Everton just keep rolling under David Moyes. This is another victory. I talked extensively about their great run of form recently on the last podcast, but this is another win. And after the Liverpool game, I spoke highly of Everton. You can look at the TikTok, and some people had said, well, it's just a new manager bounce. And there is some legitimacy to that claim. There's been countless examples in the Premier League of teams that get a new manager and then instantly their next 4, 5, 6 games, they're the best team in the world. But as I said in response to these comments, something about this feels a little different. Maybe it's the history between David Moyes and Everton. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. But Everton feel like this is going to be more than just a new manager bounce. Moyes is going to get them playing a good enough style of soccer to get them far away from the relegation spots, which they already look like right now, and doing much better. I mean, they're sitting 14th. They're right behind Crystal Palace, who are sitting 13th. And right now, Crystal Palace just feel like one of those teams that kind of exists. Like, there's nothing really remarkable I have to say about Crystal Palace. Jean-Philippe Mateta's good. He's got 11 goals and 25 appearances in the Premier League, 14 and 30 so far this season. That's great. He's a great player. He manages to score goals. But Palace are just one of those teams that I, again, just talked about with Brentford. They'll finish somewhere between 9th and 13th. And outside of a couple great individual players, you don't have much to really talk about regarding them. It's just another team in the Premier League. So that was a pretty busy Saturday in the Premier League. There was only 2 matches on Sunday, and we'll get to the first one. Team that's currently sitting in first, Liverpool, hosted a team that's currently sitting much further below them, Wolves. And shocker, starts out good for Liverpool. There was a pretty nice turn by Diego Jota in the build-up for the first goal. Luis Diaz sends it to Salah, and then it gets, kind of a lucky Mo Salah type bounce. It ends up right back into the gut of Diaz, and it was a goal for Liverpool. They were up 15 minutes in. Mohamed Salah converts a penalty in the 37th minute, and then there was actually a wonderful shot by Cunha to make it pretty interesting in the 67th minute. Maybe you thought, okay, can Wolves come back? Well, they couldn't. That was the final score. Liverpool 2, Wolves 1. It wasn't as dominant as some of the more recent Liverpool victories, but it was a victory nonetheless. And like many other games this season, Liverpool just keep on rolling with that victory over Wolves. And like many other games this season, Mo Salah scores and gets an assist because he's just fantastic. And as of right now, my Ballon d'Or winner for the 2024-2025 season. There was a Konate situation where many people speculated that he should have received a second yellow card. And then there's almost been a sort of narrative going around on social media that Liverpool have been receiving some pretty beneficial refereeing calls. I really don't want to entertain those. I think fans of every team can nitpick certain aspects of what calls teams get and what calls teams don't get to formulate a bias. I know Arsenal have had their run-ins with refereeing lately, but I feel like if you were really determined, you could pull up a bunch of calls Arsenal haven't gotten away with. People feel like there's a bias towards Man City, and right now people feel like there's a bias towards Liverpool. Again, I don't even really know where to begin there. I try to stay away from conspiracy theories regarding refereeing. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversy regarding Premier League refereeing in the last couple weeks, as well as what's going on in Europe, whether it's the Atalanta game or everything that's happened with Jude Bellingham this week. But I don't want to get in with that. Liverpool are doing great. They're continuing to doing great. They have a really big week coming up. Aston Villa and Man City. They get 4-6 points here. I think the title's theirs. The only way they can let Arsenal back in is if they fail to win in one of those games and maybe draw both. Situation like that. 3 points might be enough. A gap of 7 points it's a lot, but it's also not a lot. 13 games is a lot of games left. Wolves aren't doing good though. So Liverpool's in first. Wolves are in 17th. Wolves are risking relegation. They only sit 2 points ahead of both Ipswich Town and Leicester. And they kind of really need to get their act together because it's 8 points away from West Ham on the other side. So right now, Wolves is the only team from the Premier League last year that is currently battling the 3 recently promoted teams to stay alive in the Premier League. These 2 teams are on the opposite end of the spectrum regarding their futures and what's going to happen. The final Premier League game this weekend, they left a great one for us. Tottenham were hosting Manchester United. Man, this is going to be exciting. And it wasn't. James Maddison was able to score 13 minutes in for Tottenham. It was a shot that came in from outside the box. Andre Onana probably could have done better to clear it into a better space, but it landed right at the feet of James Maddison, who was the only person that seemed like he wanted to hustle for it, none of the Manchester United defenders. And that was it. That was the final result. Tottenham 1, Manchester United 0. There was a chance at some point, maybe in the second half, late first half, where Alejandro Garnacho kind of had a one-on-one and wasn't able to put it away. Pretty poor miss. But yeah, that's how the game finished. I watched the entirety of the Tottenham-Manchester United game. And if you told me there was 2 teams that were playing, there was going to be 15 corners, 38 total shots, and 13 on target, I think, it's a pretty good game. This wasn't a good game. This was not fun. These teams are bad. It was not good. There was constant mistakes. issues all around. Neither team looked that great. I'm willing to give both sides the slightest benefit of the doubt regarding their injury issues. I mean, if you looked at Manchester United's bench, it was Victor Hovland and a bunch of children. There was a really good meme on Twitter about Billy Madison. That was Hovland. And Tottenham's had their string of injury issues. So in that sense, I'm willing to cut them some slack. But these are teams that are just absolutely struggling this year by their own personal standards. And this game was not easy on the neutral. It was atrocious. These teams need sweeping fundamental changes from top to bottom if they're looking to hold themselves to the standards of what we perceive as a top 6 club. Because right now, Tottenham are in 12th, which they've jumped Manchester United with that victory. And Manchester United are 15th. Neither team are going to get relegated. It would be interesting to see both of them suffer the embarrassment of relegation. That would be insane. But it's not going to happen. It's got to come from ownership. It's got to come from somewhere. I don't personally believe Ange Postecoglou or Ruben Amorim are bad managers. I don't know if they're necessarily world-class managers. I'm willing to give Amorim even more time compared to Postecoglou because he's coming up on that year where he, quote-unquote, starts to win things. But this was a match pretty indicative of where these teams are in a poor place. This was a poor match. This was a bad match. I know I sound like a broken record. I know I'm saying the same things over and over and over, but I had to be subjected to watching this. So bear with me. Cut me some slack. Not just Tottenham and Manchester United. Somebody think about me. This is bad. That's all I got. So those were the 10 Premier League matches. Got through those pretty quickly. I think we're sitting right now around the 27, 26 minute mark. Might actually be the quickest episode ever. I did have an episode, maybe like episode 6 or 7, run for about 37 minutes, which was the shortest. I think the longest was 58 minutes. And I mean, I'm not trying to finish it quickly. I'm not really trying to make them last long either. You know, pull a quote from Lord of the Rings. You know, my podcast is exactly long as it needs to be. You know, a wizard's not early or on time. He shows up when he's exactly supposed to be. I butchered that, but no, just an observation. We're curious. You know, I don't know. I feel like we rolled through those pretty quick, but that was the Premier League weekend. You know, and I really only have kind of one question regarding the Premier League weekend. It's actually 2 questions from the Premier League weekend, and both those questions are about scoring. Regarding scoring, I have 2 questions. At what point will teams acknowledge that they can't play out of the back and they're tired of giving up goals that way? Because a large amount of goals in the Premier League this season have come from teams playing it out of the back and succumbing to the press of the other team. At what point do some teams realize, like, you know what, we can't do it? Liverpool can, Arsenal can, Man City can, we can't. So we're just going to go to more traditional methods of getting the ball up the field. And then my second question is the long ball back? I mean, there was about 3 this weekend, which isn't crazy. There was a long ball to Matoma, a long ball to Omar Marmoush, and then obviously a long ball to the big man, Chris Wood. But it feels like in some of the games this year, one of the most effective ways to beat the press is to send a ball over the top, whether it to be a traditional target man style forward, kind of like Chris Wood, or maybe someone with some speed, you know, a guy like Matoma, a guy who's quick. And it's just kind of funny how that, you know, plays out, because I do think I'm answering my own second question by saying, yeah, a long ball has kind of been an effective way to get behind defenses this year. And it's like time is a flat circle in soccer. The long ball was the way of English football for so long. Then it kind of goes away with the invention of tiki-taka. And then you have Klopp's full metal pressing, heavy metal pressing, full press, gegenpressing. And then all of a sudden, the long ball might be back. So those were kind of like my scoring questions coming out of the weekend. It was like, some teams are playing the long ball well. And, you know, like Chelsea gave up a goal trying to play out of the back. Everton felt like gave up a goal trying to play out of the back. And it's countless examples week after week after week. And yeah, it's the prevailing school of thought in soccer, but not everyone can do that. And I wonder what the first team that's just going to be like, screw it, we're not playing it out of the back. We'll hook it forward. We'll obviously have some progressive passes, but we're not doing the common playing out of the back that you see now. So now we're going to hit the other major leagues in Europe. Spain, Germany, Italy, in that order. And I've actually pondered how best to present that information, because I am a pretty Premier League dominant podcast. I don't give all 10 Spanish games the in-depth coverage that I get all 10 Premier League games. And that just really has to do with, you know, the American market. The Premier League's the king of the American market. You know, everyone I know even if they're Real Madrid fans or Bayern Munich fans, the Premier League is the dominant league of soccer discussion in America. And this podcast is for American soccer fans, the fan who can't watch every game. It's hard. It's hard. There's so many good games every weekend, every week. We all have lives, other sports. I get it. And that's the point. So I've been really wondering on how best to present these other leagues. So I think this week I'm going to try and change it up a little bit. I'm going to roll through some of the bigger games a little more quickly. And then at the end, kind of talk about each league as a whole, look at the league itself, and mainly focus on the bigger teams and the title races. So for the most part, in Italy and Spain, the bigger teams are in the title races. Germany, you got a team like Dortmund, who is very well known. They're a big team, but they're not in the title race. They're actually having a very poor year. So I'm really hoping if this succeeds, it turns out well, maybe the best way to convey these other leagues. It'll be quicker, honestly. So, if maybe a couple of these episodes are actually a little short on time, then maybe I will expand out a little further. But for the time being and the sake of my sanity, I feel like this is the best way to relay that information to you lovely listeners. So we'll roll through. There's still about 3-4 games in Spain I want to talk about real quick. And actually, as I say that, I realize there is something in this first game that I'm going to branch off and talk about. The first game was Osasuna hosting Real Madrid. Osasuna didn't start out well. Kylian Mbappe scored 15 minutes in, and then incredibly controversially, and this is what I'm going to talk about after this game, Jude Bellingham got a red card in the 39th minute, and then Osasuna was able to get a penalty and get a huge draw at home against Real Madrid. So that's kind of how fast I want to talk about the games, but I do want to branch out and talk about Jude Bellingham's red card, because it was a source of controversy across social media this weekend. I personally wasn't watching the Real Madrid game at the time, and it appears as though, from what Bellingham said in the cameras, is he was telling, and I, again, pardon my words, this is just verbatim, and I don't typically curse on this podcast, but this is what was said. Bellingham told the ref to fuck off, which is a very more common expression in English that maybe someone who speaks Spanish wouldn't understand. The ref thought he was saying fuck you, and immediately sent him off with a red card. Bellingham and Real Madrid said it was harsh, wasn't fair. Some people are saying that's not how you should talk to a referee. I'm kind of in the camp of I'm tired of issues with referees. Obviously, you shouldn't disrespect them. And obviously, there was some sort of language barrier, some sort of disconnect. I'm tired of seeing refereeing issues. Apparently, so are Real Madrid. I've actually just recently learned that there's rumors that Real Madrid are looking to leave Spain over this. I don't know what the legality of that is, but apparently Real Madrid have looked to join Italy, France, or Germany regarding this and their frustration with all the refereeing in Spain. I think FIFA would have to approve it, but it's nuts, and it's a shame that this is such an issue. It shouldn't be. And also there's reports that he could miss up 12 games. That's insane. It's just annoying and frankly stupid situation that shouldn't have even gotten to this point. But again, this is the third time in the last week I'm talking about refereeing. Something's wrong. Something's fundamentally wrong. So yeah, that was a little longer than I was anticipating on getting into any of these games. Also in Spain, so we're going to stay back in Spain. Athletic Bilbao went to Espanyol, drew 1-1. Kind of was a common theme is that Atletico Madrid got an early red card against Celta Vigo. Went down after a penalty from Diego Aspas in the 68th minute, but then Sorloth tied the game up. Atletico Madrid finished 1-1 with all their rivals dropping points. Barcelona took the best of this opportunity and defeated Rayo Vallecano with a 1-0 victory of Robert Lewandowski, 28th minute. I did hear from some friends who were huge La Liga fans that there were also some controversial calls in this game, and this is kind of where we are at with Spanish football. I'm gonna give you this is what I'm going to do from this point. Is now I'm going to talk about just kind of the title fight and where the big teams in Spain currently are. It was a big weekend for Barcelona. They were third going into this weekend, but with both Atletico and Real dropping points, they're now first. Tied with Real Madrid on points. They've got about 11 goals better in the goal differential. Also pretty huge that Athletic Bilbao dropped points. Bilbao was the closest team to the top three, and if Bilbao had defeated Espanyol this weekend, they would only be sitting 3 points behind Atletico Madrid, who again also are very unfortunate to have dropped points. Atletico have been playing incredibly well this year, but that red card hurt them. So I'd say right now in Europe, the best title fight is in Spain. I mean, you got Barcelona on 51 points, as I just said. Real Madrid right there with them. Atletico Madrid's 1 point behind at 50 points. And then you kind of have a wild card in Athletic Bilbao, 5 points behind them at 45 points. Italy also looks incredibly entertaining, but this Spanish title fight with about 14 games to go is going to be very, very, very interesting. It's about 3 games in Germany I'm going to highlight this weekend. Bochum defeated Borussia Dortmund 2-0 at home. Pretty much a one-sided game. Dortmund were only able to put 2 shots on target. Eintracht Frankfurt defeated Holstein Kiel 3-1 at home. Nice little victory. And then the big game of the weekend, Bayer Leverkusen hosting Bayern Munich. Leverkusen obviously was the much better side in that game, but it finished 0-0 and it went a long way for Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich might have drawn this weekend, but they were the biggest winners in Germany. It doesn't matter how much better Leverkusen played than them if the score is 0-0. And that gap right now is 8 points with 12 games to go. I think Bayern, while I'm not hot on Vincent Kompany's coaching, has enough talent to get through and see this result. It would have been a huge win for Leverkusen. It would have cut the gap to 5. But instead we're sitting at 8. And it's going to be incredibly tough for them. I don't know if they've got enough. I brought up the Frankfurt game. It was a good win for them, but they're 5 points behind Leverkusen and right now 13 behind Bayern. I think it's kind of a pipe dream to think that they have any contention for the Bundesliga title, but they should be doing all right in a Champions League spot with Leipzig 5 points behind them. I brought up Dortmund. Dortmund suffered their 9th loss of the season. They have a negative goal differential. I'm only really bringing them up because they're a big team, but they're not playing like one. They're currently sitting 11th in the Bundesliga. I mean, really, all they've got to play for at this point is the Champions League. Freiburg, Mainz aren't too far out of the Champions League spots, but it looks like this title is going to swing right back to Bayern Munich this year, unless they manage to drop some points and Leverkusen can stay perfect, which they were nearly perfect last year. So, well, they were. I mean, they didn't lose a game, so it's not impossible, but it doesn't look possible. And then last we got Italy. Italy will usually, outside of Spain and Germany, have the most games I'm going to talk about because I think Italy, even more so than the Premier League, has more what we considered big teams. I always felt like as though there were 7 traditional bigger teams in Italy, like when I was younger. And obviously it was like, Milan, Inter, Napoli, Roma, Lazio, Juventus, and Fiorentina. And now, in the last couple of years, Atalanta has just inserted themselves into that equation. I mean, they're a big team. They've got great players. They've made a Champions League semifinal. They've had great results in the Champions League. They drew Barcelona this year. They've come very close to winning a league title. I believe they won the Italian Cup recently. And it wasn't their weekend, though. They had Cagliari at home. They produced a couple chances, but they got a draw. They're currently sitting 3rd. Lazio and Napoli. Lazio was sitting a little bit better in the title fight earlier in the season. Napoli currently sitting 1st after a bad year last year. They kind of played an exciting 2-2 draw. Lazio went up early. Napoli then got 2. Lazio tied the game up in the 87th minute. Milan, who were inconsistent at the beginning of the year, but now they're only sitting 5 points outside of a Champions League spot. And right now, Italy is actually on pace to get an extra Champions League spot. But again, you don't want to bank on that. You just want to shoot for top 4. But they got a goal. The Mexican international Santiago Jimenez was assisted by the United States international Christian Pulisic for a 75th minute goal against JS Veronas. And then Roma, who, again, also a very inconsistent team this year, but they picked up a 1-0 victory over Parma. So it was a good weekend for the big teams. And then the result that shocked me the most, Juventus defeated Inter, which helped move Napoli to the top of the league. And Juventus are currently sitting 4th after their shaky start to the season. And they're only 10 points off the title with 13 games to go. It might be too much, but it's still a result. Our American boys, Tim Weah and Weston McKennie, obviously started for Juventus, as they've been doing all the time lately. Randall Kolo Muani's been fantastic for Juventus lately. And it was Francisco Conceição who scored the goal against Inter. So Italy, this weekend. The only team, I think, walking away happy in Italy this weekend truly is Juventus. Atalanta could have done better. Napoli could have done better. Lazio could have done better. Milan won, Roma won, but they might be a little too far out from consideration. They're fighting for Champions League spots, not the title. And yeah, I mean, no one in the top 3 picked up more than 1 point this weekend. you have to kind of look at Juventus and wonder, is there a shot that they could, get in a run of 3 to 4 games? They look significantly better than the beginning of the season. They seem like they found their spark. And they're only 5 points out. 10 from Napoli, which is going to be tough. 13 games left. It's not that many. But just like Spain, this is a great title fight. Napoli at 56 points, Inter at 54 points, Atalanta at 51 points. Juventus currently sitting in that 4th Champions League spot at 46 points. They are tied on points with Lazio, but they have about 8 goals better of a goal differential. And the Italian league is going to be one to watch out for the rest of the season. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you this weekend. Some good games. Nothing too crazy. Again, we got a Champions League episode. Probably going to get that out Saturday. And then next week's episode regarding next weekend's games, probably Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. So about a week from now. And, if you've made it this far in the podcast, I'm just going to say it. I love you. Thank you. I appreciate you. Again, follow us on all social medias. Continue listening to the podcast. Have a great rest of the weekend. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you. Appreciate you. Love you. Good night.